of the United States of America.
And a trip to Oregon backfires on George Bush. Good evening, I'm Shirley Hancock.
And I'm Mike Donahue. George Bush today received the most hostile reception of his presidential campaign.
It happened in Portland this morning as he spoke before a crowd of union members at Northwest Marine Iron Works. Senior correspondent Chuck Diamond was there. How did this ruckus get started?
That's a very good question, and I suspect it's one being asked around Bush headquarters tonight. With such carefully controlled campaign appearances scheduled on both sides, it is surprising to see one fail. It happened, though, as George Bush waded into a group of strong union members to make the case for the Republicans. The result, we got a very different view of a political campaign than the usual.
Good day.
It's supposed to work this way. A few staged pictures of the candidate doing something interesting, followed by a couple of good quotes blasting his opponent. That's what usually happens, but not always. George Bush could not sell this crowd on the creation of new jobs in the Reagan era.
18 million new jobs in the last 6 years. 90% of them full-time.
As the candidate talked of lower interest rates, someone asked about the deficit.
Under the last Democrat deficit, let me tell you what about it. I don't think you're paying too little in taxes. I think the government's spending too much. I will not raise your taxes. I'm not going to raise them. Get the same pledge out of that Democrat. Get that same pledge out of the Democrat. The way to get
the vice president also tried his liberal warning.
Do not gamble on another liberal Democrat coming out of nowhere.
At the end of his speech, George Bush tried another approach.
Dramatic. Little drama here. Little drama. Let these guys do the yelling. How many guys running for president of the United States has been a member of the CIO Steelworkers? You're looking at one. Here's my witness.
It may have seemed to George Bush that everyone here was opposed to it. That was not the case.
The Republicans have done a pretty good job at lowering taxes and keeping jobs for the working man.
On this day, though, Mark Hicks held the minority view of George Bush.
His timing was great. We got Brown & Root, a non-union construction company, in here for 6 weeks to try to do a job right now, threatening everybody's existence and their pocketbook. And when he comes in on top of that, I think this is what he can expect.
We want our country back. We're working people, and we're the people, man, that build this country. And under his administration, we don't feel, man, that we're really getting a fair shot. We think that we need to return our country back to the working people, man, that made this country great.
The question is, how did a rally before such a hostile crowd ever get scheduled?
The people in Washington, D.C. wanted George Bush to be with hard hats on Labor Day, okay? I mean, Labor Week.
Punch Green knows you always try to make the best out of a tough situation.
I mean, in all sincerity, I just looked at him and I said afterwards, I said, George, and Mark Hatfield said the same thing. He said, you know, we've been proud of you before, but this is one of your best hours. And boy, I was for you before 100%, but now I'm 110 behind you.
AFL-CIO Oregon President Irv Fletcher has his own ideas how the rally made the schedule.
Well, I think they felt that there's some sort of genuine feeling among rank-and-file people for George Bush, and that, in fact, it's the big labor leaders, you know, who support the carcass. That's not so.
Bill Zavin, head of Northwest Marine Iron Works, tells me that it was the vice president's advance staff that eagerly sought to have his workers released from their jobs to hear the Bush speech. So the vice president's score in Portland campaigning is not good. Heckled at Pioneer Square a couple of weeks ago, booed and jeered today. If there are any future trips, I believe you have to expect there's going to be a much greater effort to turn out a strong partisan Bush crowd, Mike.
We heard the one union member's hostility toward non-union labor at the port. Are there any other economic conditions there that might explain this hostility?
Well, Zavin, the head of Northwest Marine Iron Works, tells me that the merchant marine has just fallen apart in the last five years, and as a result of that, he says 50% of the jobs in the private shipyard repair field have evaporated. Now, there are a lot of arguments over how it was caused, but apparently a lot of these union folks will put the blame in the Reagan administration.
Well, Bush need not feel like the lone ranger.
He was booed at every turn.
Jobs. Jobs for the working man and woman of this country.
Oh, George! Get out of here! Get out of
We want Jesse!
And his speech was drowned out by catcalls.
I intend to win and be the next president of the United States of America.
Bush's message was that Democrats have misled blue-collar America, that it's the Republicans who have created jobs. But it was a message these workers weren't buying.
He doesn't speak my language. He doesn't speak my language at all. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer under the Republicans. Seems like when Democrats are around, the poor people have a better chance of life.
Bush couldn't escape even at the company canteen.
Good job. Some aren't as good, but most of them are better. You weren't listening to what I said in there. You guys...
Let's go eat. If Bush concedes he has problems in Oregon, and the scene as he left only underlined that. At Bush headquarters tonight, an exasperated official said only, "We are trying to figure out how this got on the schedule." Bob Schieffer, CBS News, Portland.
President Bush also faced a tough crowd today. Mr. Bush was in Portland, Oregon, boasting about the economic achievements of the Reagan administration. As ABC's Brett Hume reports, the audience of ship repair workers was not very sympathetic.
George Bush took his message of peace and prosperity to an Oregon shipyard today, where workers have been plagued by layoffs and where, even though most are working again, wages are down. These are union men, boilermakers, pipe fitters, machinists. It was the kind of reception the vice president's schedulers must have expected and may even have wanted to show their man can take it. Bush, who can be thrown off by the unexpected, seemed ready. He cited the millions of new jobs created in the Reagan years.
Some of you guys are too young. This guy out here, but you remember what interest rates were when we came into office? This gentleman, 21.5%. 21.5% prime rate of interest, and now they're down. What about the deficit? Deficit? Let me tell you what about it. I don't think you're paying too little in taxes. I think the government's spending too much. I will not raise your taxes. I'm not going to raise them. Get the same pledge out of that Democrat.
Bush kept on, but was for a time drowned out by the chanting workers.
Read my lips. Don't listen to all this Dukakis stuff. They're on the ropes, and they got to make all this noise. We're going to win this election. Thank you all, and God bless you.
Afterward, Bush worked the crowd for a while and was asked if the reception here had bothered him.
They gave me a good reception here. I'm used to some of these guys. You see, things are going well for me nationally, so they got to stir up a little something. Does this worry you? Good challenge.
Most workers said they were voting Democratic, but a few reacted as Bush strategists no doubt hope a nation seeing the TV pictures will.
I thought he stuck up for himself pretty good today. These guys were really hostile. They wanted to eat him up.
Part of Bush's challenge has been to hold on to the votes of working people who supported Ronald Reagan. He appeared to make few, if any, converts here today, but few of those here today said they'd ever voted for Reagan or any other Republican. Britt Hume, ABC News.
Candidate in a hard hat talking jobs and prosperity.
And I'm proud to present him here today.
Instead, workers at the Northwest Marine Iron Works gave Bush his most hostile reception of the campaign.
You remember what inflation was? You remember what inflation was that was wiping out your families? Every guy's saving double digits. Now it's down.
Bush shouted through his stump speech, denouncing liberals, promising not to raise taxes.
Well, here's one candidate who's reluctant. I will not raise your taxes, period.
But nothing worked. He even pulled out a union card showing he was once a member of the steel workers.
You're exercising your rights. I'm exercising mine. The difference is those who are exercising those rights for the opponent, liberal from Massachusetts, are going to be on the losing side, and those with me are going to be on the winning side in November. Thank you.
Ask them if we're any better off than we were 10 years ago. We ain't.
We've been up to $13.50 an hour. I've made $25 an hour 10 years ago. I'm making $12.50 now.
Later, a worker challenged Bush on why his wages had dropped.
And you're going through a competitive change. You're changing in this whole economy. That's why we sponsor the job training. No, it's not the Reaganomics. We created 17.5 million new jobs. And they're good jobs. Good jobs. Some aren't as good, but most of them are better.
Bush has been having problems winning over blue-collar Democrats who voted for Ronald Reagan. If today's reception is any indication, that task may be even more difficult than he thought. Lisa Myers, NBC News, with the Bush campaign in Portland.
Speaking at the Northwest Marine Iron Works in Portland, Oregon, the vice president was booed by shipyard workers chanting "Union Buster," but Mr. Bush said he did not mind.
These guys are good guys. They don't mind listening. They may not all agree, but they're good people. They understand the facts. They know America's back.
In other political news, Dukakis' campaign...
Bush, the most hostile reception of his campaign thus far.
A day after the formal beginning of his fall campaign, George Bush headed for Oregon and Washington State, both places thought now to be in Democrat Michael Dukakis' column. As Bush has risen in the national polls, his planners have begun targeting areas of perceived opportunity. Though here in Portland, Oregon, when the vice president was introduced to a shipyard of union workers, the reception was a lot cooler than the weather. Government contracts account for about half of the jobs at Northwest Marine Iron Works, and Bush wanted to use his speech to tie together two of his major campaign themes, defense and jobs.
In the last year alone, America has added 473,000 new manufacturing jobs, close to 500,000. And compare that to the last time the Liberal Democrats were in power.
A constant Bush campaign refrain is that the Reagan administration is responsible for more than 17 million jobs in 7.5 years. And though it's been challenged as unrealistic, Bush has set a goal of another 30 million jobs in the next 8 years. There was a lot of skepticism in this shipyard. Even his now famous line about not raising taxes had to be shouted over a chorus of chants of "Union Buster." As he finished, Bush tried another tactic, putting his one-time steelworkers union card on display. It did not accomplish much. His final plea?
So don't listen to all this Dukakis stuff. They're on the ropes and they got to make all this noise. We're going to win this election.
Were these workers impressed?
Not at all.
I don't think he was given a fair chance to talk.
I've been a union man all my life, and under this administration, I have not worked a full year at all under this administration.
And with that, the vice president left Portland for a plant tour in Everett, Washington, but not before some parting shots.
You weren't listening to what I said in there. You guys...
A Bush spokesperson said the campaign was surprised at the vice president's Portland reception, at the same time convinced he had done well. We're also told George Bush in the weeks ahead will continue trying to reach the same kinds of audiences. Gene Randall, CNN, with the Bush campaign in Portland, Oregon.